There are moments when you don't realize you've just stepped across a threshold until you look back and everything that once felt familiar has already vanished. For me, that moment began on a Monday morning, when the sunlight still felt soft outside the window, and I still believed that strong relationships could be built on kindness. My name is Godwin, and I was the creative director at an emotional marketing startup once regarded as the ideal launchpad for young minds eager to prove their worth. I had been there from the beginning, when the office only had 3 desks, a stained whiteboard, and a coffee machine that never stopped groaning. Sierra and I were the unbeatable duo, or so I thought. She was the face, the voice out there, while I was the one behind the curtain, buried in user data, analyzing emotional patterns and designing campaigns that reached straight into people's hearts. The sleepless nights were never about proving I was diligent. I simply believed. I believed that if I did it right, people would notice. I believed that true value would speak for itself. But sometimes, belief is like a rug beneath your feet. You never know who will pull it out first. I remember that campaign vividly, a major project meant to mark a turning point for the company, our first national brand deal. That was the month I went home fewer than 3 nights. Breakfast often meant cold coffee and a fistful of cashews. I built a sentiment-based system from user behavior, collaborated with the tech team to create an interactive journey, then worked closely with the content production crew to align execution with emotional triggers. I still remember the internal pitch session. Kinsey, our head of public relations, was the first to clap, her eyes filled with something like admiration. Even Clark, our angel investor and Sierra's stepfather, repeated over and over that this would redefine the market. I only smiled and said, "We made it because we worked as one." Naive words, because I didn't realize I had just handed the keys over to someone else. That afternoon, I was invited to a meeting under the pretext of discussing expansion strategies. I walked in without a shred of suspicion, my laptop preloaded with forecasts, execution roadmaps, and revised creative concepts. No one asked me a single question. Sierra sat at the head of the table, Kinsey beside her, Mara silently taking notes, and when Clark gave that subtle nod, as if preparing to deliver a sentence, I still didn't know I had stepped into a script long written. Sierra smiled, brief and crisp. "Lauren, I've thought this through. Starting next quarter, we'll be shifting the execution phase to a new team under Kinsey's coordination. You can either step back or remain as content operations lead." I didn't understand. I asked, why, but no one answered, only Darla, once my closest friend in the company, looked away. Not a single word in my defense. My name vanished from the performance reports. I stopped receiving invites to project meetings. Ideas I had proposed reappeared under someone else's name, and at the official launch event, amidst applause and Sierra's glowing keynote, I was reduced to the former creative director who helped lay the groundwork. One flat line, no feeling. I sat in the last row. The stage lights didn't reach me. No one seemed to care that they didn't. I walked out of the office that day with a folder of drafts no one had bothered to read and a staff badge already stripped of access. Not a single goodbye, not even a message asking if I was okay. People who once called me the backbone now averted their eyes. I opened my laptop at home, only to find that all internal accounts had been logged out. I called Sierra. 3 rings. No answer. A minute later, Kinsey texted, "You should take some time off. Lauren, everything is moving smoothly now. Don't stir things up." That was when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. I had been erased from the very thing I built. I sat alone in the dim apartment, the fridge humming behind me. The whiteboard still clung to the wall with a single marker note. Launch campaign, Emotion drives behavior. That was my line. But the dream was now locked away, and I was the one left outside, cold, alone, and as displaced as if I had never belonged at all. A few weeks later, when I quietly removed my profile from the company system, I discovered the domain had been transferred, the client lists updated, and all creative copyright agreements no longer included my name. That was the first night I couldn't sleep, not from anger, but because I no longer knew who I was if I wasn't Lauren from that company. I called Mr. Henderson, my old biology teacher who had once written my college scholarship recommendation letter. I said, "I don't know what to do anymore." He just replied, "Then don't do anything just yet. Sit down, look back. Not everyone who steals your work can keep it." But he didn't know that what I had lost wasn't just a job. It was faith. I used to believe you could build something lasting through sincerity. Now I wasn't so sure. One morning, I received a letter from the bank. The corporate card once assigned to me still had pending charges, including an anonymous champagne bill from the launch party night. I remembered that night well. I had sat at home watching the live stream, Sierra raising her glass beside Kinsey, saying, "No one understands user sentiment better than we do." I didn't feel angry, just something in my stomach twisted, like I had swallowed something cold and sharp. I didn't cry. I didn't tell anyone. I simply wrote in my journal, day one of not being me anymore. But what truly broke me was when I found an old campaign sketch on my personal drive. The file had been deleted. Only one copy remained, last modified by Kinsey. When I opened it, every author tag, every comment, every note had been overwritten. There was no trace of me. It was as if Lauren had never existed. I sat still before the screen. My hands weren't trembling, just cold. The room around me felt unfamiliar, as though all the memories within it had been rewritten too. In that moment, I no longer knew where or how to begin again. I just knew that if I kept sitting there, I would soon have nothing left to hold on to, not just the job, but my dignity. Not just dignity, but the belief that if you live with honesty, you won't be betrayed. But life doesn't play out like a fair story. And when you understand that, you're left with two choices, either dissolve or begin again. I still don't know which I'll choose. I only know I can't stay here. I can't let them rewrite everything. I can't let this silence be the final word. There are days you don't step outside, not because of the rain or the sun, but because something inside you is messier than the weather out there. I had many days like that, after falling out of everything I once called stable. Mornings without alarms, no meetings, no one waiting. The only thing waiting for me was the blank screen of an old laptop and the feeling that I no longer mattered anywhere. But when silence stretches on long enough, it stops being an escape and becomes space to see things clearly. I didn't start with a revenge plan, because I no longer had the energy to hate anyone. I began with one small act, opening the old hard drive where I had stored a rejected demo from an early project back when the company was still just an idea scribbled on paper. I reread every line of description, every incomplete concept, and realized how much I had once believed in it. Marketing, to me, was never just about selling, but about understanding what people feel when they choose to buy. It wasn't the message that made people gasp. It was the moment that made them pause. Emotion drives behavior, not because we manipulate others, but because we touch what they don't know how to put into words. I had believed in that once, and as long as I still believed, no one could take everything from me. I messaged Deline, the neighbor who once brought me banana bread during my late-night shifts, not to ask for help, just to hear a familiar voice. She invited me to a small bookstore at the end of the street, where on weekends, micro-business owners shared tips on how to find customers without a marketing budget. I went, not expecting anything, just wanting to sit among voices again. That talk reminded me of something simple. An elderly woman, her voice trembling, said, "Every item I sell is wrapped in old newspaper with a thank you note. Someone once told me that was unnecessary. But then one person came back, then another. No one remembers the price, but they remember feeling valued." I stood still for a moment, not because her words were unfamiliar, but because I had once said something similar during a strategy meeting 3 years ago, when I helped write thank you letters for a community fundraising campaign. When you lose yourself, sometimes you have to circle back to be reminded that your beliefs weren't wrong. They were just trampled on by people who couldn't carry them with the same care. I started writing again, not presentations or plans, just a work journal where I logged small ideas each day. One rainy morning, I thought about a podcast series helping small business owners tell their stories through real emotion. No scripted edits, no stage lights, just real voices and slices of life that anyone could relate to. I called it True Value, a plain name, nothing flashy, but there was something in it that made me feel I was heading in the right direction. I tried recording with my phone. My voice shook. Some parts were clumsy, but that made it feel more honest. I sent the demo to one person only, Mr. Henderson, the teacher who always listened when no one else would. A week later, he replied with just one line, "Lauren, this is you, the original you." I didn't need more than that. I bought a cheap domain, taught myself to build a basic website. Every morning I set a goal to write a new script. Every afternoon I recorded one episode. Every evening I shared it with 3 old college friends. They helped spread it, asking nothing in return. Slowly, the listener count grew from 3 to 8, then 14, and a week later, 36. I didn't run ads. I didn't do professional SEO, but I told the things people keep buried in their hearts. A bookstore owner shared about selling only one book on their first day. A girl who left a big company to open a tiny tea shop after her boss once slammed her resume in her face. They didn't know they were doing emotional marketing. They just told the truth. I learned how to edit visuals using free software. Launched a secondary YouTube channel called Lauren from Behind the Curtain. I didn't talk much about myself. I just posted short clips from the podcast, layered over still images with captions describing what people rarely say when starting out. A month passed. No one mentioned the old company, but one day I saw Kinsey share one of my clips on her personal page. No tag, no credit, just a vague caption. I wasn't surprised, but then I read the comments. Someone asked, "What's the source? I think I heard this on Lauren's podcast." My heart tightened a little, not from anger, but because for the first time, the truth didn't get swallowed. A week later, I received a message from a nonprofit education group in Texas. They asked if I could create emotional content to help raise funds for a soft skills program for rural high school students. I almost declined, but the last line of the email read, "We believe real stories can change behavior more than numbers ever could." That was when I knew I had no reason to hide anymore. I said yes, not for fame, not for money, but because I wanted to see if I still had it in me. The project lasted 3 weeks. Each day I worked with a group of students, recorded their stories, turned them into short scripts, and wrapped them into audio clips under 3 minutes each. I added music, cleaned up the sound, and sent them back. I thought, this is just a small thing. But then they sent me a video of the students crying while listening to the first episode. A 9th grade girl had shared her story of being mocked for mispronouncing English and how she slowly found her voice again through a podcast exercise. I'm not someone who can change the world, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had touched something that mattered. I opened the deleted files from the old hard drive, one by one, restoring them using free recovery software, not to sue anyone, just to reclaim the missing parts of myself. Among them was a behind-the-scenes video of the first campaign Sierra and I worked on. In the video, I was fine-tuning the audio while Sierra practiced the script, her voice still shaky. I paused on that frame. I wasn't angry at her, but I wasn't staying either. Sometimes the first step to starting a business isn't about capital or partners. It's about having the courage to rebuild yourself from a place no one believes in anymore. That night, I rewrote the introduction on my podcast page. It read, "For those who have been betrayed, cut from the stage, yet still rewriting their story on their own terms." I didn't name anyone. I didn't have to. Those who have been there will understand, and I know now. The deepest part of revenge through success isn't the day you return to the spotlight. It's the day you step out of the dark and build your own stage. Even if all you have is one light and one voice, there's a kind of silence that no longer feels like surrender, but like preparation. I started getting used to waking up before the sun, making coffee by hand instead of pressing a button, opening my computer without expecting emails or revision requests. Every keystroke felt like I was relearning how to breathe on my own terms. The content I created wasn't aimed at the masses. It didn't sparkle. It didn't go viral, but more and more people found it. The podcast True Value made it into the top 50 in the inspiration category on a small international streaming platform. It might have meant nothing to the world out there, but to me, it was enough to make me sit quietly for a while in the dim kitchen, listening to the opening lines and realizing that my voice no longer trembled the way it used to. I didn't rush anyone, but something strange happens when you do something real enough. People find their way to it. A media agency in Austin reached out, inviting me to speak at an online seminar on creating emotionally resonant branding for social enterprises. I had only a blurry webcam and a worn-out headset mic, but the session lasted almost 2 hours and racked up over 10,000 views in 3 days. No one mentioned the old company, but buried in the comments was one anonymous line. "So this is the real person behind the Feel to Move campaign." I didn't reply. I simply took a screenshot and saved it in a folder I named Silence Carries Weight. The ripple started when one of the small businesses I'd worked with posted a public thank you letter, crediting me for helping them shift from traditional marketing to emotional marketing. They wrote, "Godwin taught us how to reach the customer's heart before reaching for their wallet." That quote appeared on a blog specializing in social enterprise startups, and I knew it was enough to make some people take notice. 3 days later, I received an email from a former colleague at the old company. It was sent from a personal account. No punctuation. They're saying you made it all up, that you were never the one who created the original campaign, but some people still have the first drafts and the behind-the-scenes video you once shared in the internal chat. If you want them, I'll send them. I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen. Not angry, just oddly detached. They weren't afraid of being found out. They were afraid that if the truth got repeated often enough, it would overwrite their version. And when someone restates the truth calmly, it carries more weight than any accusation ever could. The following week, a new campaign launched from the old company under the name Truly New, centered around honoring user emotion. They launched it with fanfare, live streams, a celebrity face, and visuals that mirrored a hand-drawn sketch I had once shared in an early co-founder meeting. I didn't want to believe it at first, but when I saw the ad and heard the tagline, "Real people, real feelings, real connection," I knew they had lost sight of the boundary between inspiration and theft. An old contact messaged me, "Lauren, this is the third time they've recycled an idea you rejected back then for lacking sincerity. Now they call it innovation." I didn't feel upset. I simply opened my personal notes file, where the first line read, "No need to race, just stay true." I emailed that former colleague, short and direct, "If you still have the originals, send them, but only if you truly want to." 10 minutes later, I received a Google Drive link containing the full Word documents, behind-the-scenes images, and a nearly 4-minute video showing a brainstorming session where I was clearly the one leading the concept. I saved everything onto a private drive. I didn't share it. I didn't post it. I didn't need a crowd to confirm who I was. But I knew that when the time was right, silence would speak in its own way. 2 weeks later, I was invited to an offline conference in Nashville for independent content creators. I brought a USB with that clip, not as evidence, but as a reminder that I was no longer the one needing to prove, but the one choosing to tell. After my short talk, a middle-aged woman approached. She introduced herself as an editor at a digital magazine focused on female-led startups. She asked if I had ever considered telling my story from the perspective of someone betrayed who made a comeback without shouting. I smiled lightly. "I already have. I just don't use names." The following week, the Instagram account for True Value gained nearly 12,000 followers after I shared a short video about a single mother who left her office job to open a tiny diner. In the caption, I wrote, "They once called her a dreamer. Now people line up for the soup she makes with her heart." I didn't know why the clip resonated so widely, but I suspected that in a world oversaturated with filtered images and fake promises, something honest could still cut through the noise. The next day, Kinsey messaged me for the first time in almost a year. The message contained only one sentence: "You still have a way of making people uncomfortable." I didn't reply. But that evening, I received an email from the executive board of one of the nation's largest digital content platforms. They wanted to license True Value for a long-term project aimed at community education and inspiration. I stared at the email for a long while, not out of joy, but because I understood now that no fall is ever final, as long as you know how to get back up. They didn't ask who I used to be, how I got pushed out, or how my work was taken. They only asked if I was willing to keep telling real stories. And as I was drafting my response, a message appeared on my phone from a familiar number. "Sierra, I heard you're coming back into the market. Can we talk?" I didn't open it, but I knew things were shifting. Those who once thought they could control every narrative were beginning to realize that when the truth is held in silence long enough, it finds a voice of its own. That night, I received a call from Mr. Henderson. He didn't say much, just this: "Lauren, sometimes we don't need to expose anyone. We just need to shine the light long enough for them to step out on their own." I sat quietly in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the dishwasher, and thought, perhaps this is the first time I've seen revenge through success unfold so quietly. No one got yelled at. There were no expose posts, just numbers that don't lie, just real value, finally finding its place, without having to scream to be heard. There are days you step outside, not because you have somewhere to go, but because something inside you has finally settled into a quiet certainty that moves your body before your mind asks why. That morning, I put on a white shirt I hadn't touched in a long time, not to perform, but because I wanted to see myself clearly in the mirror. It felt different. I was no longer the person running from an old company, nor the one editing audio in a dim kitchen in the middle of the night. I was something in motion, not in a hurry, but finally aware of where I was headed. That morning began with an email from the coordinator of the Future Voices in Digital Branding Summit, one of the major events in the social media industry. They wanted to invite me as one of the 3 keynote speakers for a panel titled Rebuilding Trust and Audience from Zero. I reread the subject line 3 times, then left it untouched for nearly 2 hours, not out of disbelief, but because I knew this might become the moment that, if anyone ever asked, "When did you come back?" I would answer, "It was that day." I accepted the invitation, but I didn't post about it online. No status, no thank you note. I simply opened a blank document and began drafting my talk with a single question. Have you ever been erased from a story you helped create? Every word I typed felt like tapping on the mirror. Not to see the one who had been pushed out, but to face the one who no longer flinched. In my talk, I didn't mention the old company. I didn't name anyone. I simply recalled the moment I sat at an event I helped build, relegated to a chair near the bathroom, then began rebuilding everything from scratch with nothing but a cheap microphone and a belief that no longer relied on praise. When the talk ended, I walked off stage to steady. Unhurried applause. No one embraced me. No thunderous cheers from familiar crowds. But in the last row, I saw Deline, my neighbor who had quietly followed my journey all along. Her eyes were lit with something that didn't need words. She looked at me like I had just reclaimed something intangible but profoundly real. That night, I received a message from an editor at a major publication. It said simply, "Lauren, would you like to tell the whole story in your own voice? I didn't need time to consider." I sent the first recording that very night. No effects, no edits, just my voice recounting the moment I saw a champagne bill charged to the company card that once carried my name, and the feeling of hearing my own words delivered through someone else's lips. Within a week, the accompanying podcast and article made the cover of the Emerging Leaders section, titled "The Girl Erased from $1 Million Brand and Her Quiet Comeback." That headline spread faster than I imagined, not because I was famous, but because so many others had quietly endured the same and were waiting for someone to say it out loud. I started receiving letters from strangers. A final year student who said her best friend had taken credit for their group thesis, but she stayed silent. A single mother who had been falsely accused by her ex-husband and had to rebuild from nothing. Each message felt like an echo to the truth I had once buried inside myself and now was being heard by others, not through tragedy, but as living proof that kindness isn't dead. It just sometimes has to take the long way. I no longer use the word revenge to describe what I'm doing, but deep down, I know I'm giving everything back in my own way. No one gets exposed. No one is attacked. But slowly, eyes begin to shift. A major agency that once worked with the old company sent me a collaboration request. It said clearly, "We want to work with the one who created the identity, not the one who performed it." When I read that line, my hands felt cold, but my eyes stayed dry. I replied softly, attaching a new project deck titled Lauren Collective. The small studio I had just registered the week before, it was the first step of an entirely new chapter. I didn't call it a company. I called it a place for people who had once been pushed out of the race, but kept going by building a whole new game. I didn't rent an office. I created a shared space, a free-form hub for creatives focused on depth. Every project started with one question: what do you want the audience to feel? No one asked about the budget first. They asked if the story could be real. 3 weeks after Lauren Collective began operating, I received an email with a familiar subject line. The sender was Sierra. This time it wasn't a text. It was a long letter. Her voice caught between remorse and pride. She wrote about how the old company was struggling, staff leaving from lack of direction, partners pulling out because they couldn't find a coherent message. Sierra didn't apologize. She simply asked, "Could we sit down and talk? I need to understand what's really happening." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction either. I just sat there for a long time, not touching the keyboard. That feeling wasn't victory. It was more like finally arriving at the place I should have belonged all along. And I knew, if I chose to meet her, it wouldn't be to answer Sierra's question. It would be to answer my own. Was I truly ready to return when I reopened the email? I didn't write much, just one line. "If you want to talk, come to the studio. But this time, you'll be sitting in the audience." That was the first time I didn't flinch at the name that once threw my life off course. And now that it had returned to my inbox, it held no more power. It was just another part of the story, not the center of it. That night, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and replayed the first recording I ever made, my voice still shaky. Then I played the most recent one, my tone calm, grounded, and steady. Between those two recordings were hundreds of days spent facing myself, gathering the pieces, standing up again, and reclaiming the lead role in my own life. And I knew that tomorrow, when I walked through the studio door, I would no longer be the one written out of the story. I would be the one telling it. There's a kind of silence that no longer feels like surrender, but instead becomes the clearest proof of how rebirth takes form. When Sierra stepped into my new studio space, her eyes scanned the framed prints on the walls, the warm amber lights, and the neatly lined microphones behind the soundproof glass. She didn't say anything for the first few seconds. She just stood there, her hand tightening slightly around her handbag. I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask if she was tired. I simply pointed to the chair across from me, the guest seat we had used during the first podcast recordings. "You can sit there if there's something you want to say. Wait until it feels like the right time." I turned away, adjusting the audio levels for that afternoon's session. The episode was titled, "What We Keep When There's Nothing Left to Lose." The guest was a woman who had once lost everything, betrayed by her closest friend who took her entire client list, but who now ran a chain of secondhand bookstores based on a community profit-sharing model. When she said, "I don't try to reclaim fairness anymore. I build it in ways they can't interrupt." I noticed Sierra's gaze pause, her hand, resting on her lap, stopped moving, but I didn't look at her. I didn't need a reaction. What I was doing that day wasn't meant to contradict anyone. It had become its own current, flowing in a direction untouched by the place I'd once been pushed from. The presence of Lauren Collective slowly grew into a quiet but steady force in the world of emotional content creation, without flashy headlines or viral campaigns, through a series of stories rooted in true value and lasting relationships. We began attracting clients that large agencies often overlooked because there wasn't enough data to track them. These clients didn't need graphs. They needed someone who understood the quiet fear behind a customer's eyes when prices rose without explanation. They needed someone who could rewrite a slogan in their own voice, not through algorithmic suggestions. As word began to spread among small businesses about Lauren's place, I didn't feel like I was staging a comeback. It felt more like I was finally back on the path I was meant to be on. The truth is, I had never left the industry. I was only momentarily removed from the light that someone thought they could hoard by casting others into the dark. But darkness cannot consume those who have patience. It simply becomes a space to breathe, to heal, and to reframe everything on your own terms. One March morning, I received an invitation to serve as a strategic advisor for a national series of school-based emotional literacy programs. coordinated by the Ministry of Education and a coalition of nonprofit organizations. It was a project of national scale, with long-term social impact. What struck me most was that they hadn't found me through a resume. They found me through a podcast, one shared in a professional educators forum. They wrote, "We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for someone who speaks from lived experience." That's when I realized that the very thing that once got me excluded from boardrooms was now opening doors that didn't require introductions. During my first meeting with the coordination team, someone said, "I once heard you talk about pretending to celebrate an idea that had been stolen from you. It made me rethink how I treated an old colleague." I didn't respond. I just smiled and opened my first slide. The first thing I said was, "Emotion isn't a resource to be mined. It's the only way to make people believe they're being heard." Around that same time, Sierra's old company started facing a quiet but growing media crisis. A recent campaign was accused of copying the concept of an independent creator. The leadership failed to respond in time. The backlash didn't explode. It simmered, persistently. Investors withdrew. Former collaborators began to leave one by one. The last to resign was Kinsey. An internal email titled, "We Can't Keep Surviving on Borrowed Stories," leaked across social media in a single afternoon. I didn't share it. I didn't comment. But internally, I didn't deny it. This was the kind of ending I had once imagined. No one had to collapse. All it took was for falsehoods to wear away slowly under time and light. Then I received a message from someone I didn't expect. Darla, the one who sat silently while I was dismissed from the project, the one who said nothing when I needed someone to speak up. Her message was short. No explanation. No justification. "I read your article. I remembered your eyes that day, and I wish I hadn't stayed silent. I read it and left it there. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. But something unknotted inside me, not because I forgave her, but because I no longer needed to carry that weight." That night, I recorded a new podcast episode. This one wasn't about anyone else. It was about me, about the first time I was betrayed, the first time I saw my name erased from a company's history, the first time I dared to step out of silence and begin telling the story in my own voice. I didn't name anyone. I simply said, "Some people will use you as a stepping stone for the story they want to tell. But if you're patient enough to step back, you'll see that you don't need to be in that story to have value. You can write a new one, where you are the lead and no one has the right to erase you." After that episode aired, I didn't take on new projects for a while. I spent time restoring the garden behind my house, long neglected during the years I was consumed by the old work cycle. I relearned how to work with my hands, how to move at a slower rhythm, how to find peace again. Someone once asked me, "How did you pull off such a powerful comeback?" I just smiled and answered, "I didn't come back. I simply stopped pretending I had left." In a world where fame is inflated and failure is buried, I chose to exist without needing a trophy. And the most powerful form of revenge through success isn't about making someone regret. It's about proving that even if you were pushed off the stage, you can still build a new one where the lights are bright enough to see every honest line on your face.